Epsilon 7 wasn't just a repair station. Calling it that would be like calling the Sistine Chapel a room with a ceiling. It was a cathedral of maintenance, a temple of technical precision, a floating monument to the idea that every bolt, rivet, and weld in the universe deserved to be treated with the reverence typically reserved for newborn royalty. The station hung in the void between three major trade routes like a mechanical spider, its 72 docking arms extended in perfect symmetry, each one gleaming under the light of the nearby blue giant star. The Andromeda Trade Collective had spent 400 years building Epsilon 7 into the premier maintenance facility in this corner of the galaxy. Ships came here to be pampered, not merely repaired. The Krill ran the place, naturally, because no other species in known space could look at a starship and see 17,000 potential failure points that needed immediate attention. The Krill themselves were magnificent creatures, if you appreciated obsessive-compulsive arthropods with 6 manipulator limbs and an eye for detail that would make a watchmaker weep. They were approximately 4 feet tall, covered in iridescent blue-green chitin that clicked pleasantly when they moved, and possessed compound eyes that could detect microscopic stress fractures from across a hangar bay. Evolution had designed them to build coral reefs with mathematical precision. Galactic society had given them starships to fuss over instead. They were very happy about this arrangement. The human had been ruining their happiness for approximately 6 months. Nobody was entirely sure how the human had ended up working at Epsilon. The official record said something about a work exchange program and cultural cooperation, but the unofficial story involved a broken-down freighter, an impossible repair done with spare parts and what the human called creative problem-solving, and a station administrator too impressed to ask questions. The human wore the standard mechanic's jumpsuit, kept their dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, and had the kind of permanent grease stains under their fingernails that suggested they'd been born holding a wrench. The Krill had filed 43 formal complaints. The human had fixed 57 supposedly unfixable problems. The station administrator had stopped reading reports from both parties. The morning the fleet commander's yacht arrived, Bay 17 was running at its usual Krill standard efficiency, which meant everything was taking 3 times longer than necessary but would theoretically last until the heat death of the universe. The human was underneath a cargo hauler, doing something inadvisable with a plasma torch, while the Krill workers gave the workspace a wide berth. They'd learned. The yacht glided into the bay with the kind of grace that came from having more money than physics should reasonably allow. It was a Vex-class personal cruiser, which meant it cost more than some planetary economies and came standard with amenities that most species would classify as obscene luxury. The hull was pristine silver white, buffed to a mirror finish, with decorative chrome accents that served no purpose except to announce that the owner could afford chrome accents. Well, mostly pristine. On the starboard bow, just above the third viewport, there was a dent. It was roughly 6 inches across, maybe a quarter inch deep. The kind of minor hull damage that happened when a micrometeorite traveling at significant fractions of light speed decided to introduce itself to your trajectory. The yacht's automated systems had already sealed the breach, reinforced the area, and filed an incident report. The Krill head mechanic saw it and screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain. It was a scream of existential horror, the sound a perfectionist makes when confronted with imperfection in their domain. The head mechanic's name was unpronounceable in most languages, rendered approximately as chittering of precise calibrations in morning light, but everyone just called them Chief. Chief had been maintaining starships for 60 years. Chief had never, not once, allowed a vessel to leave their bay with even the suggestion of damage. Chief was having a moment. The human rolled out from under the cargo hauler, stood up and wandered over to see what the fuss was about. They had a smudge of coolant on one cheek and carried the plasma torch like it was an extension of their arm. "What's the problem?" the human asked. Chief gestured at the yacht with all 6 limbs simultaneously, eye stalks quivering. Catastrophic structural compromise. Hull integrity violation. Potential Cascal failure point. This is, Chief's translator struggled with the Krill term. Unacceptable within all known parameters of acceptable. The human leaned in, squinted at the dent, and straightened up. "It's a scratch." The translator rendered this statement. There was a moment of absolute silence in Bay 17. Somewhere in the distance, a pneumatic lift hissed. A prismatics technician dropped a toolkit. "A scratch." Chief's voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow worse than the screaming. "Yeah, I've seen worse on a grocery cart. The human tapped the dent with one knuckle. The hull rang with a dull thunk. See? Not even through to the secondary plating. The auto seal already did most of the work. Just needs a little cosmetic touch-up. Chief made a sound like air escaping from a broken valve. This vessel belongs to Fleet Commander Brass Wind through thermal vents. It is a Sybil, a representation of Krill engineering superiority. And you, Chief pointed one trembling limb at the human. You call it a scratch? Because it is a scratch. It is a violation of the sacred trust between mechanic and machine. It is a wound that requires proper treatment according to established protocols. The human shrugged. Okay, so we fix it. Fix it. Chief repeated the words like they were a foreign concept. Fix it. Yes. We fix it. According to the Krill Maintenance Codex, Section 47, Subsection 12, Paragraph. Or, the human interrupted, and hear me out here, we could just fix it. By now the commotion had attracted attention. Mechanics from other bays had wandered over, representing a decent cross-section of galactic biodiversity. There were Arquillians, those logic-obsessed crystalline beings who treated everything like a math problem. A cluster of prismatics, who cared more about aesthetics than function and were probably already composing poetry about the tragic dent. A Daltharian observer, floating in its mobility sphere, sensors extended with interest. The station administrator arrived, which was obvious because the temperature in the bay dropped 3 degrees, and everyone suddenly smelled ozone. The administrator was a Nexian, which meant it was essentially a sentient gas cloud held together by electromagnetic fields, and an inflated sense of bureaucratic importance. It had been managing Epsilon 7 for 20 years, and had learned that the best management strategy was to let problems resolve themselves. This was not resolving itself. Explanation. The administrator's voice emanated from everywhere and nowhere, translated directly into everyone's neural centers. Chief and the human spoke simultaneously. This human suggests blasphemy. There's a tiny dent. Enough. The administrator rippled with what might have been frustration. Chief. Assessment. Time for repair. Standard protocol. Chief's eye stalks focused on the dent with the intensity of a targeting laser. Minimum 72 hours. Hull section must be removed, analyzed, stress tested, replaced with certified materials, sealed, tested again, painted with 17 layers. Or 18 minutes with a buffer and some touch-up paint. The human said. The Arquillian observers began calculating probability. The prismatics gasped in aesthetic horror. The Daltharian sensors flickered with what might have been amusement. Chief turned to face the human fully. You cannot be serious. Dead serious. You're talking about rebuilding the entire front end of this thing for a dent I could pop out with a rubber mallet. A rubber mallet. Chief's voice hit frequencies that most species couldn't actually hear. This is a Vex-class cruiser, certified by the Engineering Guild, insured by the Collective, blessed by the craftmasters of the Third Moon. The human looked at the yacht, then at Chief, then back at the yacht. Still just a scratch though, and that was how the diplomatic incident began. Chief began laying out the repair protocol with the solemnity of a priest reciting sacred texts. The other mechanics gathered closer, some out of professional interest, others because watching Chief have a meltdown was the most entertainment they'd had all week. Step 1, Chief announced, manipulator limbs dancing through the air as they counted off each phase. Complete hull scan using quantum-level resonance imaging to determine the full extent of molecular displacement. Step 2, removal of the damaged panel using laser cutting with precision to 0.001 millimeters. Step 3, analysis of removed panel for stress fracturing, material fatigue and crystalline structure compromise. Step 4, sand, fill, paint. The human said. Consultation with the manufacturer regarding replacement panel specifications and certified materials. Step 5, acquisition of replacement panel from authorized distributor, including verification of authenticity codes. Step 6, sand, fill, installation of replacement panel using micro-welding techniques performed in clean room environment. Step 7 through 47, involve sealing, testing, retesting, calibration, paint matching through spectroscopic analysis. The human held up 3 fingers. Sand, Phil, 20 minutes tops. Chief's entire body went rigid. When the krill froze like that, it usually meant their processing centers were trying to reconcile incompatible information. It was the biological equivalent of a computer encountering a division by zero error. You, Chief said slowly, do not understand. This is not about time. This is about correctness, about precision, about maintaining the standards that separate us from the chaos of entropy. It's about over-engineering a simple problem until it becomes complicated enough to justify your existence. The human replied cheerfully. The Arquillian observers chimed in unison, their crystalline bodies resonating with harmonic agreement. Statistical analysis suggests human methodology has 94% success rate across documented repairs. Krill methodology has 96% success rate, but requires 400% additional time investment. 2% difference. The human note. And I bet most of that comes from you folks counting looks pretty as part of success criteria. Chief's eye stalks swiveled to glare at the Arquillians, who had the grace to dim slightly in what might have been embarrassment. This is not about statistics. This is about philosophy, about the krill understanding of our place in the universe. And here it came. The human had been working at Epsilon 7 long enough to recognize when a krill was about to launch into the speed. They'd heard variations of it from every krill on the station, usually right before they fixed something in 5 minutes that the krill had scheduled 3 days to repair. We are builders, Chief said, voice dropping into a reverent register. For 10,000 years my species has understood a fundamental truth. The universe tends toward disorder, but we tend toward order. Every repair is a battle against entropy. Every correctly torqued bolt is a victory against chaos. We do not simply fix things, we restore them to their proper state, and in doing so, we maintain the cosmic balance between you. Yeah, but the ship doesn't care about cosmic balance, the human interrupted. It just wants to not have a dent. The prismatics made a collective sound of artistic anguish. One of them, its skin shimmering through several colors of distress, floated forward. You reduce the noble art of repair to mere function. Where is the beauty? Where is the meaning? In getting the job done so the fleet commander can fly their fancy yacht without looking at a dent. The human had learned about the human approach to galactic integration the way most mechanics learned their trade, through necessity, improvisation, and a healthy disregard for people who said things were impossible. When humanity had stumbled into the broader galactic community 70 years ago, they'd been hopelessly outclassed in every category that mattered. Slower ships, weaker weapons, primitive materials science. But they had one advantage. They were really good at fixing broken stuff with whatever happened to be lying around. The first human-alien interaction, after first contact, had involved a collective survey ship with a catastrophic drive failure. The ship's krill engineer had calculated it would take 6 weeks to fabricate replacement parts. A human technician had fixed it in 4 hours using wire, adhesive, and something called duct tape that the galactic database still didn't have a proper classification for. The repair had lasted 3 years before needing maintenance. The collective had been having an existential crisis about human engineering methods ever since. You people, Chief said, gesturing at the human with evident frustration, have no respect for proper methodology. You see a problem and immediately jump to the simplest solution without considering whether that solution is correct. If it works, it's correct. If it works, if it works. Chief was building up to another scream. A solution that merely works is not a solution. It is a compromise. It is an insult to the problem itself, which deserves a proper answer. The human pulled a piece of sandpaper from one of their many pockets. They always had tools in those pockets. The krill suspected the pockets violated several laws of physics regarding internal storage dimension. Tell you what, the human said. I'll fix it my way. You time me. If it takes longer than 20 minutes, or if the repair doesn't pass inspection, I'll do it your way. All 47 steps. Clean room and everything. The bay had gone very quiet. The Doltharian sensors were practically vibrating with anticipation. The Arquillians were already calculating odds. The prismatics looked like they couldn't decide whether to be horrified or fascinated. Chief's manipulator limbs twitched. And if you succeed, then you admit that sometimes a scratch is just a scratch. The The station administrator rippled with what might have been amusement, or might have been resignation. Acceptable. Terms. Proceed. The human grinned, grabbed a toolbox that looked like it had survived at least 3 different apocalypses, and approached the yacht. Chief covered their eye stalks with 2 limbs. I cannot watch this. Someone notify me when the sacrilege is complete. Relax, the human said, pulling out what appeared to be an ordinary rubber mallet. It's only a scratch. The sound Chief made could have curdled milk across 3-star systems. The human started with the mallet, naturally, because why use sophisticated equipment when blunt force could accomplish the same goal? They tapped around the edges of the dent with the kind of casual confidence that came from either deep expertise or profound ignorance, and with humans it was genuinely impossible to tell which. See, the thing about hull plating on these luxury models, the human said, talking to no one in particular but loud enough that everyone could hear, is that they're designed to look good first, function second, which means they're actually easier to work with than military-grade stuff. Military plating would rather shatter than bend. This fancy material? It remembers what shape it's supposed to be. Chief had retreated to the far side of the bay but kept 2 eye stalks pointed in the direction of the yacht, watching through splayed manipulator limbs like someone watching a horror movie. The human tapped the center of the dent. The hull made a resonant thunk. Tapped again, slightly harder. Another thunk, and the dent flexed outward minutely. There we go. Material memory. You folks over-engineered this thing so thoroughly that it practically wants to fix itself. An Arquillian observer chimed softly. Query. Is the human complimenting the engineering or criticizing it? Yes, another Arquillian responded. The dent was starting to disappear under the rhythmic tapping, not being pounded out violently, just encouraged back into its proper shape through patient, precise impacts. The human worked with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd done this exact repair about 3,000 times before on 3,000 different surfaces. The real trick, the human continued, because apparently this was going to be a running commentary, is understanding that perfect is the enemy of good enough. You folks, they gestured vaguely at the assembled aliens. You've got this idea that everything needs to be flawless, but out in the real universe where people are actually using their ships instead of keeping them in climate-controlled hangars, stuff breaks. Stuff gets dinged. And if you need 72 hours in a manufacturer consultation every time you get a scratch, you're not maintaining ships, you're performing archaeology on them. A prismatic floated closer, its color shifting to thoughtful purple. But surely there is value in maintaining standards, in ensuring that repairs meet established criteria for longevity and reliability. The human paused mid-tap. Sure, absolutely, when it matters. You get a cracked coolant line near a reactor core, you better believe I'm going to follow every protocol invented, and probably invent a few new ones. But this, they gestured at the now nearly invisible dent. This is cosmetic damage on a non-structural panel. It affects literally nothing except how pretty the ship looks. And yeah, I'm going to make it pretty, but I'm not going to treat it like surgery on a head of state. They pulled out the sandpaper and started working the area where the dent had been. Smooth circular motions, checking their progress with fingertips every few seconds. More mechanics had gathered now. Word had spread through Epsilon 7's maintenance decks that the human was doing something inadvisable again, and nobody wanted to miss it. There were at least 30 different species represented in Bay 17 now, watching a single human fix a dent the old-fashioned way. You know what humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization is? The human asked, not looking up from their work. It's not our weapons or our ships or our supposedly charming personality. It's our complete willingness to try the stupid solution first and see what happens. That seems unwise, an Arquillian observed. It's incredibly unwise. But here's the thing, most problems are actually pretty simple. You folks have been traveling the stars for so long that you've forgotten that sometimes the answer isn't elegant mathematics or mystical engineering philosophy. Sometimes the answer is hitting it with a hammer until it looks right. Chief made a strangled noise from across the bay. The human switched from sandpaper to a tube of hull filler, squeezing out a small amount and spreading it across the repaired area with practiced ease. Bonds at the molecular level, flexes with the hull, matches the thermal expansion coefficient. You know what we used to use on Earth before we got the fancy space-age materials? Bondo and Hope. What? The Doltharian asked, sensors flickering with interest. Is Bondo? Body filler for ground vehicles. Worked great. Looked terrible. Lasted forever. Cost practically nothing. Then we met you folks and discovered we could charge people enormous amounts of money for essentially the same thing, if we called it quantum-bonded molecular restructuring compound. Several mechanics laughed. Chief did not laugh. Chief was questioning every decision that had led to this moment. The human let the filler cure for exactly 90 seconds. They counted out loud, then hit it with a small heating element to accelerate the bonding process. More sanding followed, finer grit this time, until the repaired area was perfectly smooth to the touch. Now, the human said, pulling out a paint analyzer, this is the only part where I'll admit your way has merit. Paint matching is an art form. They held the analyzer against an undamaged section of hull, waited for it to catalog the exact color spectrum, then programmed a small spray applicator with the results. The paint went on in 3 thin coats, each one drying in seconds under a UV lamp that the human produced from yet another impossible pocket. 14 minutes, an Arquillian announced, including preparation and cleanup time. The human stood back, admired their work, then pulled out a handheld scanner and ran it over the repair. The device beeped affirmatively. Structural integrity, optimal, hull thickness, within tolerance, paint match 99.7%. Huh, the human said. Usually I only get 98% on the paint, must be having a good day. They turned to face the assembled crowd of mechanics, most of whom looked like they'd just witnessed either a miracle or a crime and couldn't decide which. Here's what I don't get about all of you, the human said, gesturing expansively. You've got these incredible technologies, materials that can self-heal, scanners that can detect problems before they happen, tools that can manipulate matter at the atomic level, and you use all of that to make simple repairs take forever. We use it to make repairs permanent, Chief said, finally emerging from their self-imposed exile. Your repair will last, what, 5 years? 10? Probably 20, actually. This filler is pretty good stuff. And the proper repair would last 50 years. The human shrugged. Sure, and in 50 years the fleet commander will probably own a different yacht anyway, or this one will have been upgraded 17 times and the entire bow section will be different. You're building for a future that isn't going to exist the way you think it will. Chief approached the repaired section slowly, like approaching something dangerous. Their eye stalks extended, focusing on the area where the dent had been. Sensors emerged from their carapace, sophisticated detection equipment that could measure stress down to the molecular level. They scanned for a full minute. The equipment confirmed what visual inspection suggested. The repair was perfect, structurally sound, cosmetically flawless, completely adequate for purpose. Chief's manipulator limbs drooped slightly. This is acceptable. High praise, the human said dryly. But it is not correct. It's correct enough. And that, the human reflected, was the fundamental philosophical difference between their species and basically everyone else in the galaxy. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history making do with what they had, fixing things with inadequate tools, improvising solutions that were good enough to survive another day. Other species had optimized, refined, perfected. Humans had learned that perfect was something you aimed for but never quite reached, and that was fine, because good enough could still get you to the stars. The station administrator rippled. Repair, acceptable, Chief, comments. Chief was silent for a long moment. I require time to process this development. Take all the time you need, the human said, already packing up their tools. I'll be under that cargo hauler if anyone needs me. The port stabilizer is making a noise, and I figure I can have it fixed before you finish having your existential crisis. Fleet Commander Brass Wind through thermal vents arrived precisely 43 minutes later, which was early by Krill standards but fashionably late by everyone else's metrics. The commander was an imposing figure, nearly 5 feet tall, with ceremonial gold plating on their carapace, and the kind of bearing that suggested they'd spent their entire career being the most important Krill in any given room. They clicked into Bay 17 surrounded by an entourage of 3 attendants, and what appeared to be a personal documentation specialist whose entire job was to record the commander's reaction to things. The Krill took their hierarchies seriously. Chief intercepted them halfway across the bay, manipulator limbs moving in what the human had learned to recognize as the Krill equivalent of nervous fidgeting. Commander, Chief began, voice carefully modulated to convey respect and professionalism. Your vessel has been, that is to say, the repair is, we have completed. The commander's eye stalk swiveled to look at the yacht, then back to Chief. Explain why my ship appears operational when I was informed the damage would require a minimum of 3 days to properly address. This was the moment. The human watched from underneath the cargo hauler, plasma torch forgotten, interested to see how this particular disaster would unfold. They'd placed mental bets with themselves about whether Chief would throw them under the proverbial bus or have a complete psychological breakdown. Either option seemed equally likely. Chief's carapace darkened slightly, a biological sign of distress. The damage was Chief's translator struggled with the next word as if the concept itself was painful. Alternative methodology. Alternative. The commander repeated the word with the kind of dangerous calm that preceded either violence or formal complaints. Explain alternative. The human rolled out from under the cargo hauler and stood up, because if there was going to be an interstellar incident, they might as well be visible for it. "I fixed the dent," they called out. "Took about 15 minutes. It's good as new." The commander's entire entourage turned to stare. The documentation specialist's recording equipment swiveled to focus on the human with what might have been excitement. "Apparently diplomatic incidents made for compelling content. You," the commander said slowly, "are the human." "One of them, yeah. The human who has been causing Chief considerable distress for the past several months." "Also yes, though I prefer to think of it as providing alternative perspectives on established maintenance protocols." The commander approached the yacht, moving with the deliberate precision that suggested a being accustomed to inspecting things and finding them wanting. They circled the vessel once, eye stalks examining every centimeter of hull plating, pausing when they reached the formerly dented section. Silence stretched across Bay 17 like a physical force. The assembled mechanics held whatever passed for breath in their respective species. Chief looked like they were contemplating the existential merits of throwing themselves into the nearest airlock. The commander extended sensors from their carapace, running the same molecular-level analysis that Chief had performed. The equipment hummed and beeped and confirmed what everyone already knew. The repair was structurally sound, cosmetically perfect, and completely adequate for purpose. "This repair," the commander said finally, "was completed in 15 minutes. About 14, actually," the human corrected, "but I rounded up to give myself some padding. And it meets all safety specifications. Exceeds them technically. That filler is rated for hull breaches 3 times this size." The commander's eye stalks rotated to focus on Chief. "And the standard repair protocol would have required." Chief's voice was barely audible. The commander was quiet for another long moment, processing this information through whatever complicated cognitive pathways the Krill used for decision-making. "Chief, your assessment. Is this repair acceptable for a vessel of my status?" This was it. The moment where Chief would either adapt or double down on principle. The human had seen this scenario play out before with other species, other mechanics, other stubborn adherents to the idea that there was only one correct way to do anything. Chief's manipulator limbs twitched, folded, unfolded, twitched again. "The repair," Chief said slowly, each word clearly causing physical pain, "is structurally sound, cosmetically flawless, and," the next part came out in a rush, like ripping off a bandage, "adequate for purpose." The commander made a clicking sound that might have been amusement. "High praise from you, Chief. The human must have performed a miracle." "Not a miracle," the human interjected. "Just a repair. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy." The commander seemed to taste the words. "You fixed critical damage to a Vex-class cruiser with nothing fancy. It wasn't critical damage, it was a dent." "A dent." The commander's tone shifted, becoming less formal. "A dent that my own species would have spent 3 days obsessing over, analyzing, documenting, and ultimately overcorrecting because we cannot accept that sometimes the universe requires simple solutions to simple problems." Chief made a strangled noise. The human tried very hard not to look smug and failed completely. "I have been fleet commander for 18 years, the commander continued, apparently on a roll now. "I have overseen the maintenance of 200 vessels. I have approved repair protocols that consumed enough resources to fund small colonies. And in all that time, not once has anyone suggested that perhaps we were making things more complicated than necessary. To be fair," the human said, "I've been suggesting it pretty regularly for 6 months now. People just don't usually listen." The commander's eye stalks focused on the human with uncomfortable intensity. "You understand that what you have done here is not merely a repair. You have challenged a fundamental aspect of Krill cultural identity. I fixed a dent. You have demonstrated that our elaborate protocols, our sacred methodologies, our entire philosophical approach to maintenance may be excessive." "I mean, I wouldn't say excessive," the human said diplomatically. "Just may be optimized for different priorities than most situations require." The Arquillian observers chimed softly. "The human demonstrates wisdom in political phrasing. The human demonstrates ability to backpedal when confronted with consequences," a prismatic observed. The commander made a decision. The human could see it happen, the way the commander's posture shifted from formal authority to something more curious. "I wish to learn this methodology." Chief's entire body went rigid again. Several other Krill mechanics in the bay made sounds of distress. My role requires understanding all aspects of vessel operation and maintenance. If there exists an efficient methodology that produces acceptable results, I should understand it." The commander paused. "Also, it will horrify the engineering guild, which I find appealing." The human laughed. "Okay, that's actually a great reason. Sure, I can teach you the basics. Fair warning though, most of it is just knowing when good enough is actually good enough. That," the commander said, "is apparently a skill my species has not yet mastered." Chief approached slowly, eye stalks drooping in what might have been defeat or might have been resignation. "Commander, if I may, the human methodology does work, but it lacks elegance, precision, the satisfaction of knowing that every possible variable has been addressed. Chief, the commander said gently, my yacht had a dent, now it does not have a dent. I am satisfied. Are you? Chief was quiet for a long moment. I am experiencing cognitive dissonance, but also curiosity, which is deeply uncomfortable. Growth often is, the human said. Tell you what, next repair that comes in, we do it together. Your methodology for the stuff that matters, my methodology for the stuff that doesn't. We'll figure out where the line is. The station administrator rippled with what was definitely amusement now. Compromise. Achieved. Diplomatic incident. Averted. Recommend both parties submit joint methodology proposal for review. The commander clicked agreement. Excellent. I expect a full report on human repair techniques, applications and limitations. Include sections on when traditional methodology remains superior. There's going to be a lot of those sections, Chief muttered. Probably, the human agreed. But there's also going to be a lot of sections where hitting it with a hammer is genuinely the best option, and you folks need to make peace with that. The assembled mechanics began dispersing, returning to their own repairs and maintenance schedules. The Arkrillians were already calculating optimal hybrid methodologies. The prismatics were composing what they claimed would be an epic poem about the philosophical implications of acceptable imperfection. The Doltharian had recorded the entire incident and was probably going to sell it to a news service. Fleet Commander Brasswind through thermal vents prepared to depart, entourage forming up around them. But before leaving, the commander turned back to the human. One question, the commander said. The repair you performed on my yacht, you stated it would last approximately 20 years, give or take. And you believe this is acceptable. I believe it's realistic. Materials degrade. Technology advances. Trying to build something that lasts 50 years means you're building for a future you can't predict. The commander's eye stalk shifted in what the human had learned to recognize as contemplative agreement. My species builds monuments. You build solutions. Perhaps there is wisdom in both approaches, or perhaps, the human said, there's wisdom in knowing which approach fits which problem. Indeed. The commander paused at the bay exit. Incidentally, when you performed the repair, did you truly only use human methodology? No Krill techniques at all? The human grinned. I used your UV bonding accelerant instead of waiting for natural cure time. Your molecular paint matching scanner instead of eyeballing it. And that quantum bonded filler is definitely not something we invented. Chief's eye stalk snapped to attention. You used our technology. The good parts, yeah. See, here's the secret. It's not about human ways versus Krill ways. It's about using the best tool for each part of the job. Your tech is incredible. Your methodology just buries it under 17 layers of unnecessary process. Chief made a sound that might have been understanding, or might have been the beginning of another existential crisis. So you are saying we should maintain our technological standards but modify our procedural approach. I'm saying maybe a scratch is just a scratch, but the tools you use to fix it can still be sophisticated. The commander departed, apparently satisfied. Chief stood in the middle of Bay 17, surrounded by the evidence of successful human methodology, looking like someone whose entire worldview had been gently but firmly adjusted by 14 minutes with a rubber mallet. This is going to change everything, Chief said quietly. Nah, the human replied, heading back to the cargo hauler with the problematic stabilizer. It's just going to change some things. The important stuff, the actual engineering, the quality materials, the precision when it matters, that's all still valid. You folks just need to learn that sometimes the universe doesn't require perfection. Sometimes it just requires something that works. And if I disagree, the human looked back over their shoulder and smiled. Then we'll argue about it. I'll fix things my way anyway. You'll file a formal complaint, and the station administrator will ignore both of us. Same as always. Chief's carapace shifted to a color that might have been amusement. I suppose consistency has value. Now you're learning. Bay 17 returned to its normal operational status, which meant Krill mechanics resumed their elaborate repair protocols while the human did inadvisable things with improvised tools. The difference was that now, occasionally when a simple problem presented itself, a Krill mechanic might hesitate before launching into a 47-step procedure. Might consider whether maybe, just maybe, the simple solution was the correct one. And somewhere in the station's administrative files, a joint methodology proposal was being drafted that would eventually revolutionize maintenance protocols across 12 sectors, though neither Chief nor the human would ever admit whose ideas contributed more to the final version. Because in the end, the scratch hadn't been just a scratch. It had been a question: does everything need to be perfect, or does some stuff just need to be good enough? The answer, as it turned out, was yes, both, depending on the situation. which was the most frustrating kind of wisdom because it meant actually thinking about each problem individually instead of applying universal rules, and that was exhausting for everyone involved. But it was also correct, which the Krill could respect, even if they found the entire concept deeply uncomfortable. The human went back to work on the cargo hauler, humming something that might have been a song from Earth. Above them, through the transparent sections of Bay 17's hull, ships came and went in the eternal dance of galactic commerce, some of them pristine, some of them damaged, all of them eventually in need of repair. And now, at Epsilon 7, there were two ways to handle that need. The Krill way, elegant and thorough and time-consuming, and the human way, which was just hitting things with a hammer until they looked right. The galaxy somehow had room for both, even if Chief would need another 6 months to fully accept that fact.